Welcome to Timekeepers for Sleep. If your mind is still busy, if it keeps circling through to-do lists, emails, or numbers that won't stop, tonight's story is for you. This is not a review, not a sales pitch, not a countdown of top 10 watches. It's a long, slow story about a single diver's watch, built to work in the dark, far below the surface of the sea. You don't have to remember model numbers. You don't have to know reference codes. You don't even have to stay awake until the end. You can just lie back, let your body get heavy, and let this story about time, water, and a glowing dial in the deep drift past like a gentle current. For now, get comfortable. Let your shoulders drop where they want to drop. Let your hands land wherever they land. There is no correct position, only the one that feels easiest. Take a slow breath in through your nose and let it go. Tonight we're going underwater, not in a rush, not in danger, just in imagination. We're going to follow a watch designed in the early 1950s, a watch that promised something bold, that it could go down where the light fades out, where pressure grows, and still keep time. A watch called the Submariner. Imagine a quiet harbor long after most people have gone home. The sky is dark and clouded enough that only a few stars make it through. Street lights throw soft cones of yellow onto the wet boards of the pier. Masts and cranes stand as dark silhouettes against the faint glow of the city. Water taps quietly against the hulls of moored boats. Ropes creak, metal rings click against posts. Somewhere a gull makes a half-hearted call before settling down again. On one of the boats, in a small pool of light coming from the cabin, a diver is preparing for an early morning job. He moves slowly. There is no hurry. Everything has been checked the night before. Tanks, regulators, weights, lines, knife, backup light. Piece by piece he lays out his gear. Among the metal and rubber and neoprene, something small and precise rests on a folded towel. A stainless steel watch with a black dial and a rotating bezel. The case is round, solid, with a crown guarded by small shoulders. On the dial, large luminous markers mark the hours, and hands filled with glowing material wait silently. The watch is a Submariner. Right now it is doing the same thing it was designed to do in 1953, ticking steadily, keeping time to help someone work safely underwater. Long before this harbor night, people were already working beneath the surface of the water. Divers checked ship hulls, repaired harbor structures, laid underwater cables, and searched for things lost below. Early diving gear was heavy and awkward. Brass helmets, thick suits, weighted boots. Time underwater was not just a matter of convenience. It was a matter of safety. Too long at depth and compressed gases could cause problems during the ascent. Too short and the job might be left unfinished. At first, time was measured with simple surface clocks. Someone on the boat would watch a clock and signal the diver when it was time to return. But as diving became more common and more complicated, the idea of a watch that could go down with the diver became more and more important. Pocket watches didn't like water. Many wristwatches didn't like it either. Even if a watch survived a splash or a rainstorm, diving deep into cold, pressurized seawater was another level of challenge. Cases leaked, crystals fogged, hands corroded. What divers needed was something built from the start to be calm in the deep. A watch that could handle water pressure, darkness, and the simple, unforgiving fact that time underwater must be measured accurately. In the early 1950s at Rolex, there was already experience with waterproof cases. The company had created the oyster case in the 1920s, a screw-down back, a screw-down bezel, and a crown that sealed tightly, keeping water and dust out. That design had survived swims across cold channels, days in rain and spray, years of everyday life on wrists. But casual water resistance was not enough for the growing world of professional diving. After the Second World War, interest in underwater exploration grew. Military experiments, scientific expeditions, and commercial diving operations pushed deeper and stayed down longer. Around 1953, Rolex introduced a new watch based on the oyster principle, but built specifically for divers. It would be called the Oyster Perpetual Submariner. It offered something bold for the time: water resistance to 100 meters or 330 feet. Later versions would push that to 200 meters and then 300 meters. But even that first claim set a new standard. The Submariner had a robust stainless steel case, a rotating 60-minute bezel so a diver could align the zero marker with the minute hand at the start of a dive and see at a glance how long he had been underwater. It had a dark dial with large luminous markers and thick hands that could be read in murky water. It was not a jewel, not a dress watch. It was a tool. And yet, over time, that tool watch would quietly become one of the most recognizable luxury watches in the world. The first Submariner reference was the 6204, produced in 1953 and showcased to the public at the Basel Watch Fair in 1954. It had a 37mm case, quite small by today's standards. The crown was 5.3mm. The hands were simple pencil-style hands, not yet the iconic Mercedes hands that would come later. Almost immediately, Rolex began refining the design. Reference 6205 appeared in 1954, first without the word Submariner on the dial. Collectors call these clean dial models, and then with the text returned. The second series of the 6205 introduced the Mercedes-style hour hand, a design that would become instantly recognizable. The three-part division of the hand helped surface tension hold luminous material in place, making it easier to read underwater. By 1959, the case had grown to 40mm. Crown guards had been added to protect the crown from impacts, and the bezel had become more deeply ridged for better grip. This evolution happened quickly. Every couple of years, a new reference with subtle tweaks. Very unlike the Rolex we know today, where designs changed glacially over decades. But what remained constant was the core blueprint. Black dial, luminous markers, rotating bezel, water resistance rated for serious diving. A watch built right the first time, then refined to near perfection. Back in our harbor, the diver dims the cabin lights. The watch on the towel reacts instantly. The luminous paint on the hour markers on the hour hand and on the minute hand begins to glow. At first, when submariners were new, that glow came from radium paint, radioactive, bright, and as the years went by, recognized as a health risk. Later models switched to tritium, still radioactive but much lower in energy. Modern submariners use non-radioactive materials, eventually evolving into superluminova and then chromalite, which glows a calm blue and stays readable for hours in the dark. Whatever the chemistry, the visual effect is the same. In the dark, the dial becomes a quiet constellation. A triangle at 12, rectangles at 3, 6, 9, circles for the other hours, thick hands glowing steadily. The bezel pip at 0, a small luminous dot at the top of the bezel, lights up 2, ready to mark the start time of a dive. The diver lifts the watch, turns the bezel until the glowing dot lines up with the minute hand, and feels the satisfying clicking resistance of its ratcheting mechanism. That click is not just tactile pleasure. It is designed so the bezel moves only in one direction, counterclockwise, to prevent accidental extension of dive time. If it's bumped, it can shorten the indicated time but never lengthen it. Underwater, that conservative bias can mean safety. 4s. The sky over the harbor lightens slightly. The darkest night gives way to the first hints of dawn. The diver finishes his checks, slides the watch onto his wrist, and tightens the steel bracelet. The clasp closes with a firm, mechanical snap. Over the watch, he pulls the sleeve of his wetsuit, leaving just enough of the dial visible that he can check it easily. On the surface, the watch is in its element as a normal timekeeper. It feels like an ordinary morning routine. But as he steps to the edge and drops into the water, the watch enters the environment for which it was built. Cool water closes around the case. Pressure increases as he descends. The oyster case remains sealed. The crystal holds. The crown screw-down tube keeps water out. Inside, a rotor swings with the movement of his arm, winding the mainspring automatically, the perpetual part of the watch's name. The balance wheel swings. The escapement ticks. Time inside the sealed case does exactly what it does on land. The diver checks the bezel. 10 minutes, 15, 20. The longer he stays, the more important that little arc of time becomes. But for him in this moment, it is routine. He has done this many times. For you, listening in bed, you don't have to feel any of the cold or the weight of the gear. You can simply borrow the image of the glowing dial moving through dark water, like a small, controlled moon moving through a private night. Shift your attention now to a place far from the harbor. A watch factory in Switzerland. The building is clean, bright, precise. In one of the workshops years ago, a watchmaker sat at a high bench working under good white light. Before him, laid out on a soft pad, were the parts that would become a submariner. The movement with its main plate, gear train, balance, escapement. The dial, dark and matte, with cutouts and applied markers. The hands waiting to be pressed on. The case, polished and brushed in the right places, its crown already fitted with seals and threads. Piece by piece, the movement was assembled, oiled, tested. The dial was placed, the hands were aligned. Clearances were checked, so that in the dark the hour and minute hands would never collide and stick. The whole assembly was lowered into its case. The back was screwed on with measured torque. The watch was then tested under pressure, simulating depths of 100, 200, or 300 meters, depending on its generation. For the factory, this was daily work. For the watch, it was the first time it experienced its reason for existing. After passing its tests, the watch would be fitted with a bracelet, regulated for accuracy, cleaned, and finally placed in a box to be shipped out into the world. From a bench overlooking Swiss hills to a small shop in a city, or to a distributor for a commercial diving company, or to a boutique where someone would fall in love with the way the bezel clicked. In every case, the journey began with a quiet bench and careful hands. The watchmaker who assembled this particular submariner might have made hundreds of them over the years. To him, each watch was a task to be completed with precision. He followed procedures, checked tolerances, made sure everything met specifications. But he also knew that somewhere, someday, someone would depend on this watch. A diver would check it before ascending. A sailor would glance at it during a night watch. Someone would wear it every day for decades. So he took his time. He made sure the rotor swung freely. He made sure the crown sealed properly. He made sure the loom was applied evenly. When he was satisfied, he placed the watch in its test chamber. Water pressure was applied, slowly increasing. The watch was observed for any signs of moisture entering the case. None appeared. The pressure was released. The watch was dried, examined under magnification. Still perfect. It passed. The watchmaker made a small notation in his logbook, placed the watch in a tray with others that had passed, and moved on to the next assembly. For you lying here tonight, this scene is just another layer of the story. A reminder that objects we use were once assembled by someone's careful hands, somewhere far away, with attention and skill. The early submariners were already impressive, but diving technology did not stop in the 1950s. By the late 1960s and 1970s, saturation diving was becoming more common. In these operations, divers lived for days or weeks in pressurized habitats, then went out to work at depth before returning to the same pressurized chamber. This allowed longer work times in deep water, but it introduced new challenges for equipment. One of those challenges involved the very tiny atoms of helium gas. Helium, used in breathing mixes for deep dives, could slip into watch cases during long exposures under pressure. The helium atom is incredibly small, about 0.49 angstroms in atomic radius, compared to a water molecule at 2.75 angstroms. These tiny particles could diffuse through gaskets that easily blocked larger molecules like water. This wasn't a problem while the watch remained under pressure. But during decompression, as external pressure dropped, the helium inside the case began to expand. Sometimes the pressure built up so much that the crystal would pop off the case. To tackle this, Rolex partnered with the French commercial diving company COMEX in the early 1970s. COMEX, Compagnie Maritime d'Expertises, was an industry leader in underwater operations, credited with numerous advancements in hyperbaric testing and gas mixtures. Together, they tested watches in real saturation operations in the North Sea oil fields, in deep engineering projects. This collaboration led to special submariner references equipped with a tiny device in the side of the case, the helium escape valve. When internal pressure rose above external pressure during decompression, the valve would open just enough to let helium out, protecting the crystal and the case. The valve was spring-loaded. It worked automatically. As pressure built inside, the spring compressed and the valve opened. As pressure decreased, the spring released and the valve closed again. Rolex filed the patent for this helium escape valve on November 6, 1967. It was granted on June 15, 1970. Most of these heavy-duty watches evolved into another line, the Sea Dweller, introduced in 1967 with a depth rating of 610 meters, later increased to 1,220 meters. But some rare submariners bearing the COMEX name on their dials and the valve on their flank became legends among collectors. These COMEX submariners were never sold to the public. Rolex provided them at zero cost to COMEX divers in exchange for detailed performance notes. The divers used these watches in extreme conditions that only a small handful of individuals will ever experience. Many were damaged or destroyed over the years. The survivors are now among the most sought-after vintage Rolex watches in existence. You don't need to memorize reference numbers. You don't need to chase auction prices. For this story, it's enough to know that the Submariner was not just office jewelry. It was tested in quiet, serious work, oil fields in the North Sea, deep engineering projects, long days under gray water. Small instruments serving big tasks. The divers used these watches in extreme conditions that only a small handful of individuals will ever experience. Many were damaged or destroyed over the years. The survivors are now among the most sought-after vintage Rolex watches in existence. Imagine one of these COMEX divers living in a saturation habitat for 2 weeks. The habitat is a pressurized chamber, kept at the same pressure as his working depth, perhaps 300 meters below the surface. Inside, the atmosphere is not normal air. It's a mixture of helium and oxygen. Helium is used because nitrogen, which makes up most of normal air, becomes dangerous under high pressure. It can cause nitrogen narcosis, a dangerous state of confusion. But helium is safe to breathe at depth. The only problem is that helium atoms are incredibly tiny. Over days and weeks in this helium-rich environment, those tiny atoms work their way through the watch's gaskets and into the case. The diver doesn't notice. The watch keeps ticking. Everything seems fine. But then comes decompression. Slowly, carefully, over many hours, the pressure in the habitat is reduced back to normal sea level pressure. As external pressure drops, the helium trapped inside the watch case begins to expand. The watch was built to withstand external pressure pushing in, but it was never designed for internal pressure pushing out. Without the helium escape valve, the expanding gas would build up until, pop, the crystal would blow off the watch. But with the valve, as internal pressure rises, a small spring compresses and the valve opens. Helium escapes. Pressure equalizes. The crystal stays in place. Once decompression is complete and the pressure is back to normal, the spring releases and the valve closes again. The watch is ready for the next dive. You don't need to memorize reference numbers. You don't need to chase auction prices. For this story, it's enough to know that the Submariner was not just office jewelry. It was tested in quiet, serious work, oil fields in the North Sea, deep engineering projects, long days under gray water. small instruments serving big tasks. And somewhere in Switzerland, watchmakers kept refining the design based on feedback from these deep-sea workers. A gasket that needed to be slightly thicker. A valve spring that needed a different tension. A crystal that needed a different shape. Small adjustments, made possible because people in extreme conditions took the time to write detailed notes about how the watches performed. There is another path through which the Submariner entered people's imagination. Not through oil platforms but through cinema. In the 1960s and 1970s, a certain fictional secret agent began appearing on screen wearing a submariner. In 1962, actor Sean Connery first introduced himself as James Bond in the film Dr. No. On his wrist was a Rolex Submariner reference 6538, known among collectors as the Big Crown Submariner for its oversized 8mm crown. The watch was not provided by Rolex. The film's budget didn't allow for it. Instead, producer Albert Cubby Broccoli took the Submariner from his own wrist and handed it to Sean Connery. In Dr. No, Connery wore it on a brown leather strap. Later, in Goldfinger and Thunderball, he wore it on a striped NATO-style strap that has since become known as the Bond NATO. The 6538 accompanied Connery through 4 Bond films: Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and Thunderball. Perhaps the most iconic shot is from Goldfinger, where Bond illuminates the watch's dial with his cigarette lighter after emerging from the water in a perfectly pressed white tuxedo. Later Bond actors continued the tradition. George Lazenby wore a reference 5513 in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Roger Moore wore the same reference in Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun. Timothy Dalton wore a reference 16610 in License to Kill in 1989. After that, Bond switched to Omega, but the association between the Submariner and quiet, capable competence had already been cemented. The watch, meant originally as a practical tool, became a symbol of cool, competence, and quiet capability. Someone sitting in a movie theater might not know anything about water resistance or helium valves. They just saw a character who stayed calm under pressure, and a watch that stayed calmly on his wrist. For you, trying to fall asleep now, this part of the story is just another layer. The Submariner is both things at once. A tool tested in cold, hard conditions and a piece of costume in a warm cinema, seen above bowls of popcorn. there is another path through which the submariner entered people's imagination. Not through oil platforms, but through cinema. In the 1960s and 1970s, a certain fictional secret agent began appearing on screen wearing a submariner. In 1962, actor Sean Connery first introduced himself as James Bond in the film Dr. No. On his wrist was a Rolex Submariner reference 6538, known among collectors as the Big Crown Submariner for its oversized 8mm crown. The watch was not provided by Rolex. The film's budget didn't allow for it. Instead, producer Albert Cubby Broccoli took the Submariner from his own wrist and handed it to Sean Connery. In Dr. No, Connery wore it on a brown leather strap. Later, in Goldfinger and Thunderball, he wore it on a striped NATO-style strap that has since become known as the Bond NATO. The 6538 accompanied Connery through 4 Bond films: Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and Thunderball. Perhaps the most iconic shot is from Goldfinger, where Bond illuminates the watch's dial with his cigarette lighter after emerging from the water in a perfectly pressed white tuxedo. In that brief moment, the watch became more than a timekeeping tool. It became a symbol. The scene says, "This is a man who can go from underwater sabotage to a cocktail party without breaking stride." And the watch on his wrist is equally versatile. Later Bond actors continued the tradition. George Lazenby wore a reference 5513 in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Roger Moore wore the same reference in Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun. Timothy Dalton wore a reference 16610 in License to Kill in 1989. After that, Bond switched to Omega, but the association between the Submariner and quiet, capable competence had already been cemented. The watch, meant originally as a practical tool, became a symbol of cool, competence, and quiet capability. Someone sitting in a movie theater in 1964 might not know anything about water resistance or helium valves. They just saw a character who stayed calm under pressure, and a watch that stayed calmly on his wrist. That image stayed with people. Years later, when they could finally afford a nice watch, they remembered. They remembered the way the watch looked on Connery's wrist, the way it caught the light, the way it suggested competence without arrogance. For you, trying to fall asleep now, this part of the story is just another layer. The Submariner is both things at once. A tool tested in cold, hard conditions, and a piece of costume in a warm cinema, seen above bowls of popcorn. Two very different worlds connected by the same dial. And both valid. The COMEX diver and the movie fan. The saturation habitat and the theater seat. The watch serves them both in different ways. Back in our harbor, the diver's workday continues. He completes his checks underwater, follows his planned times, and returns to the surface. Back on the boat, gear comes off in the reverse order it went on. Weights, fins, mask, tanks. At some point, the wetsuit sleeve is pulled back and the watch is visible again in the cool air. Salt water beads on the steel. Tiny drops gather at the edge of the crystal. The diver rinses the watch in fresh water, gently turning the bezel to keep any grit from settling beneath it. Then he dries it with the same towel it rested on the night before. He might not think anything of this ritual. To him, the watch is part of his kit, no more mysterious than his knife or his timing tables. But over years, the steel may pick up small scratches. The bezel insert may fade slightly from black to a charcoal gray. The luminous material may slowly lose its brightness, developing a soft, creamy color known as patina. Each mark, each change, is an echo of time spent in real work. The bracelet links were slightly where they pivot. The clasp shows tiny scratches from being opened and closed thousands of times. The case edges soften from years of being pulled on and off the wrist, from brushing against door frames, from resting on tables. These are not flaws. They are evidence of a life lived. Decades later, someone might see this same watch in a glass display case in a collector's home, or on a velvet tray at an auction. They will see age and character, but not the individual dives. They won't know about the morning in 1978 when the diver checked a ship's hull in murky harbor water. They won't know about the afternoon in 1982 when the watch came off the wrist for servicing and the diver felt strangely naked without it. They won't know about the evening in 1995 when the diver's son asked to try on the watch and was amazed by how heavy it felt. Those exist only in the quiet memory of the watch, in the wear on its bracelet, in the softened edges of its case. For you tonight, this long working life is just another gentle thought. A reminder that objects can have histories that stretch across decades, even as the people who wore them come and go. And a reminder that you, too, carry histories in your body. Small marks, small changes, evidence of a life lived. Take a longer moment now before we finish to come back to your own body. You are not in a wetsuit. You are not under pressure. You are simply here wherever here is for you. Notice the surface that supports you. A mattress, a couch, a chair. Feel the points of contact: heels, calves, thighs, hips, back, shoulders, head. You don't need to change anything. Just notice that you are held. Let your toes unclench if they were curled. Let your legs be heavy. Imagine your legs as the heavy steel bracelet of the submariner. Strong, functional, but allowed to rest. Your knees are like the pivot points in that bracelet. They've done their work today. They don't need to do anything more tonight. Your hips, your lower back, your spine, these are the main plate of your body, the foundation on which everything else is built. They can rest now. If your jaw is tight, see if it can loosen just a little. Your tongue can rest against the floor of your mouth. Your teeth don't need to touch. Your lips can be soft. Your shoulders have been holding tension all day, like the mainspring wound tight inside a watch. But now, like that spring slowly unwinding to power the watch, your shoulders can slowly release their tension to power your rest. Let them drop. Just a millimeter. That's enough. Your arms lie beside you or across your chest or wherever they've settled. Like the hands of a watch, they've pointed and gestured and moved all day. Now they can be still. Your chest rises and falls with your breath. Like the balance wheel of a watch, swinging back and forth, regular, automatic, requiring no thought. Breathe in for 3 seconds. Breathe out for 4 seconds. You don't have to count. You don't have to control. Just notice. Your heart beats in your chest. Like the escapement in a watch, it keeps time you don't have to track. Somewhere, in a watch on a table, in a clock on a tower, a hand moves forward one more tick. You don't have to follow it. Time can move on its own for a while. Like the pendulum in the tower we visited, like the escape wheel in the oyster we explored before, your body has its own rhythms. your heartbeat, your breath. These continue without instruction. The submariner, designed to work in the dark depths, doesn't need light to function. You, designed to rest in the dark night, don't need to see progress to heal. Let yourself be like that watch underwater, present, functional, but requiring nothing extra from you. You are waterproof to the pressures of the day. You have a bezel that only turns one way, toward rest, toward release, never back toward more work. You have luminous markers inside you that glow in the dark. Memories, dreams, hopes that don't need daylight to exist. And you have a movement inside you that keeps going, keeps ticking, even when you're not paying attention. Trust that movement tonight. Not every submariner ended up on a diverse wrist. Some found their way to offices and conference rooms. Imagine a modern city far from the sea. In a high glass building, an executive sits at a table talking about budgets, strategies, long-term forecasts. On his wrist, under a crisp shirt cuff, is a submariner. For him, the deepest water he sees most weeks is the bottom of a swimming pool. And yet, he chooses to wear a watch capable of surviving depths more than 300 meters below the surface. He likes the weight, the history, the feeling of reliability. The same features that keep a diver safe on a murky job make the watch reassuring in a meeting. Legible at a glance, solid, trustworthy. It may seem like a mismatch, such a capable tool in such an ordinary environment. But it also tells a softer story. Sometimes we wear, on quiet days, things that were built for the storms we never meet. And that's all right. Maybe you have something like that in your life. A skill you learn but rarely use. A strength you built but don't often need. Still there. Still part of you. Even on the quiet days. For you tonight, whether you wear a watch or not, the important part is that you can borrow that feeling of capability without needing to perform. You don't have to go deep. You don't have to prove anything. You can simply rest. You are capable. The proof is that you've made it to tonight. Now you can rest. As this story slows even further, picture once more the watch underwater. The sea is dark. Perhaps you imagine a reef or a ship's hull or just open blue-green space. The submariner sits on a wrist or rests on a rock or floats in your imagination by itself. Its loom glows softly. Its bezel triangle points to some learned minute. Inside the case, gears turn, springs relax and tighten, pivots slide on tiny bearings. The watch does not care whether anyone is looking. It does not know where the surface is. It does not know what time it is for anyone else. It only knows the steady beat of its own balance. In your bed so far from the ocean, you can borrow that simplicity. You do not have to track everyone else's schedules. You do not have to react to every notification, every request. For this stretch of time, you can allow your mind to be like that watch in the deep, present but quiet, ticking but not worried. And if the ticking slows in your awareness, if the story fades away, if words blur into soft sound, that is the point. If you are still awake enough to hear this, you have already given yourself something gentle to focus on. You have looked away from sharp screens and into a softer picture. If your eyes are heavy, let them close. If your thoughts are wandering, let them go. The submariner can keep the time for both of you. You can sleep now. You can rest. Thank you for listening to Timekeepers for Sleep. If you enjoyed drifting off with the submariner, subscribe to the channel and let us know what watch or clock tower you'd like to hear about next. Sleep well.